A Navy SEAL walked the quiet winter streets of Silver Creek, his loyal German Shepherd puppy trotting by his side. The only companion who never asked about the past he couldn't forget. Then, without warning, the pup froze and pulled hard toward a bench half buried in snow. Beneath it, a trembling Doberman puppy huddled alone, too weak to lift its head, its breath fading in the cold. The shepherd lowered himself, wrapping his tiny body around the stranger, refusing to move, refusing to leave. The soldier stared, realizing that his dog had just made a choice he himself once forgot how to make. What happened next would remind him, and all of us, that even the toughest hearts can still be taught how to love again. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. Snow had fallen through the night, blanketing Silver Creek Park in a fragile, white stillness. It was the kind of winter morning that muffled the world, where even the breath of trees seemed to sleep. The air was thin, clean, and cruelly cold, the kind that burned the lungs with every inhale. Logan Carter adjusted the wool collar of his coat and pressed his weight into the cane that steadied his damaged left leg. His German Shepherd puppy, Scout, tugged gently at the leash ahead, leaving a trail of small, eager paw prints in the snow. Logan was 38, tall, broad-shouldered, with a build forged by years of military discipline, yet worn down by quiet pain. His face bore the angular marks of endurance, square jawline rough with stubble, a faint scar slicing from temple to cheek, steel blue eyes that once scanned desert horizons for danger, now drifting over peaceful pines as though still searching for ghosts. The wind caught the edges of his short, dark brown hair, streaked prematurely with gray, and for a moment he looked both younger and older than his years. A man caught between two wars, the one he fought and the one that refused to end inside him. Scout trotted ahead with the restless joy of youth. Barely 6 months old, the puppy still had the oversized paws and curious eyes of a creature not yet grown into its courage. His coat, a mix of black and tan, shimmered under the pale light. Ears perked, tail swinging like a metronome of life. To Logan, the dog was more than a companion. Scout was the only reason he left the house some mornings. After all the years of silence, the barks and whines felt like small, honest conversations that didn't need words. He passed the frozen pond, its surface like cracked glass beneath the morning sun, and exhaled a breath that curled into fog. Silver Creek had changed little in the years since he'd left for deployment. The same benches, the same crooked lampposts. Only he was different now. His gait was slower, his thoughts heavier. He had come home from war, but war hadn't left him. Some nights, in the half-dark of his small cabin, he could still smell diesel fuel and gunpowder. He had learned how to survive, but not yet how to live. "Easy, Scout," he murmured, tightening his grip on the leash as the puppy sniffed the air. The dog's tail stiffened. In a heartbeat, all playfulness drained from his body. He froze, head low, ears forward. Logan felt the tension through the leash, that instinctive alertness animals carried when something wasn't right. "What is it, boy?" he asked softly. Scout's muscles quivered. Then, without warning, he pulled hard toward a wooden bench, half buried in snow. The leash burned against Logan's glove as he stumbled to follow. "Scout, slow down!" But the command fell useless against the urgency in the puppy's stride. They reached the bench, and Scout stopped abruptly, nose pressed against the snow-caked ground beneath it. Logan leaned down, squinting into the dim space under the bench. At first, all he saw was shadow, a bundle of dark shapes. Then movement, a faint shiver, a sound that wasn't quite a whimper, more like the fragile breath of something half awake and half gone. He crouched, ignoring the ache in his knee, and brushed away the snow with his glove. Beneath it, a tiny Doberman puppy curled into itself, ribs showing through thin, matted fur, paws raw from cold, eyes wide and hollow with fear. It couldn't have been more than 8 weeks old. Its body trembled with each shallow breath. Scout whimpered, his tone softer than Logan had ever heard. He inched forward, crouching low on his front paws. The German Shepherd puppy lowered his head, then did something extraordinary. He wrapped his body around the smaller dog, pressing his chest against it, covering it with his warmth. The Doberman flinched at first, but didn't resist. The two shapes merged into one, black and brown fur blending into the white of snow. Logan's heart clenched in a way he hadn't felt in years. The last time he'd seen something fight that hard to keep another alive was overseas, a memory that returned uninvited, of a medic shielding a wounded comrade with his own body under a collapsing wall. It was the same instinct here, stripped of words or uniforms, the raw, stubborn refusal to let go. He took off his glove and reached out slowly, letting his hand hover near the Doberman's head. "Hey there, little one," he whispered. The puppy tensed but didn't bite. Its breathing came fast, frightened. Its fur was stiff with ice. Logan could feel its ribs beneath his fingertips. "You're freezing," he murmured, voice cracking. "You've been out here all night, haven't you?" Scout looked up at him, eyes bright but pleading, as if asking permission. Snowflakes clung to his muzzle like tiny crystals. Logan sighed. He wasn't supposed to take in strays. His life was already too full of things that needed fixing. But watching Scout refuse to move, he felt something in his chest soften. From across the park, the faint jingle of a bicycle bell echoed. A woman, pedaling carefully through the slush. She was older, perhaps in her early 70s, wrapped in a thick maroon coat, silver hair tucked under a knitted hat. Ruby Miller, the local baker. Her face was kind and weathered, eyes pale blue like the early frost. She stopped when she saw him kneeling by the bench. "Logan Carter," she called, voice warm despite the cold. "You always find trouble before breakfast?" He smiled faintly. "Guess trouble finds me, ma'am." Ruby parked the bike and peered closer. "Oh, Lord," she breathed. "That poor thing. How long do you think it's been here?" "Too long," he said. Scout found him. The older woman crouched beside him, her knees popping audibly. She looked at the two puppies huddled together and shook her head. "Some people don't deserve the gift of animals," she muttered, then looked at him with that firm gentleness older women carried. "You can't just leave it, Logan." He met her gaze, uncertain. "I've already got one to take care of." "Maybe that's exactly why you found another," she said softly. "Sometimes God sends us what we need disguised as what we think we can't handle." Her words hit deeper than she could have known. For years, Logan had blamed himself for the men he couldn't save. Maybe this tiny life half buried in snow, was a small redemption offered back. He lifted the Doberman carefully into his arms. The puppy was feather light, its heartbeat weak but steady. Scout stood beside him, tail wagging slowly, as if relieved that his mission was understood. Ruby watched them with a smile that trembled at the edges. "There you go," she said. Looks like your family just grew by one." Logan looked down at the little creature pressed against his chest, then at Scout, who leaned his head against the other dog's body. The German Shepherd gave a low, protective rumble, not of threat, but of promise. For the first time in a long while, Logan felt something stir. Not duty, not guilt, but purpose. As he started toward the road, snow crunching beneath his boots, Ruby called after him. "You always were the kind that saved things that couldn't save themselves." He didn't turn back, just raised a hand in thanks. The wind carried the scent of cinnamon bread from her basket and the faint warmth of kindness through the cold air. He didn't know what the next hours would bring. A vet visit, maybe hard choices later. But right now, the world had narrowed to 2 small lives in his arms and 1 steadfast puppy at his feet. Logan looked down at Scout, who walked proudly beside him, and said quietly, "You chose him, didn't you?" The shepherd's tail thumped once against his leg in reply. And as they stepped out of the park, snow swirling gently around them, Logan understood this wasn't coincidence. Scout hadn't just found another stray. He had found a reason for both of them to start healing. The wind had picked up as Logan crossed the quiet streets of Silver Creek, the town buried beneath a curtain of white. Snowflakes clung to his beard and lashes, softening the harsh lines of his face as he carried the trembling Doberman puppy close to his chest. Scout trotted beside him, small paws sinking into the powder, his head turning every few steps to check that the bundle in Logan's arms still breathed. The morning was nearly silent, except for the rhythmic crunch of boots on snow and the occasional hum of a distant car crawling along Main Street. The veterinary clinic stood at the edge of town, a single-story brick building with a green sign that read Silver Creek Animal Care. Its windows glowed with the soft amber light of a place where warmth was still possible. As Logan stepped onto the porch, a bell above the door chimed, and the smell of antiseptic and fur met him like a familiar memory from years ago. One of those fleeting moments from childhood when he and his father had brought home their first dog. Inside, a woman in her mid-40s looked up from the counter. She had auburn hair tied into a messy bun, glasses slipping down her nose, and kind eyes that managed to be both alert and gentle. Her name tag read, Dr. Emily Hart. She had the kind of face that carried tiredness well. Faint lines near her mouth spoke of long shifts, but her smile still reached her eyes. "Oh my," she said, stepping around the counter. "Let's get him on the table." Her voice had the calm, grounded tone of someone who had seen more suffering than she could count, but still chose to meet each new case with hope. Logan followed her into the small exam room, where posters of animal anatomy lined the walls. The air was warm and humming with the low purr of a heater. When he laid the puppy down on the table, its paws slid slightly on the metal surface. Scout sat near the door, tail tucked, but eyes locked on his new companion, every muscle alert. Dr. Hart leaned closer, moving with slow, practiced gestures. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered to the Doberman, who flinched but didn't growl. She examined the thin body, tracing gentle fingers along the ribs. "He's underweight, severely. Frostbite on the paws, but not deep. No fractures. Lucky little guy." She looked at Logan then, reading his face as if she'd seen that expression 100 times before. The one of someone pretending not to care too much, too soon. "How'd you find him?" "My dog did," Logan said, his voice roughened by the cold and something heavier. "Under a park bench." Dr. Hart nodded, scanning the puppy with a handheld microchip reader. The device stayed silent. No chip. No owner, she murmured, jotting notes on a clipboard. I'll start him on fluids and some high-calorie supplements. You can leave him here if you'd like. We'll contact the local rescue shelter to take over once he's stable. At the sound of "leave him here," Scout rose, padding forward on careful paws until he stood between Logan and the vet table, his body angled protectively toward the Doberman. His fur bristled just slightly, tail straight but not aggressive, a soldier's stance in miniature. Dr. Hart stopped mid-step, then smiled faintly. "I see," she said softly. "Big brother's not having it." Logan exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. "He's not usually like this." "He's got good instincts," she replied, moving to prepare an IV. "Sometimes dogs see what we're still figuring out." While she worked, Logan stepped back to the corner of the room and rubbed a hand along his jaw. His leg ached, as it always did when he stood too long, a dull reminder of the shrapnel buried deep beneath old scar tissue. He'd been through worse pain, but somehow this, watching a starving puppy flinch at every movement, felt harder to bear. A knock came from the hallway door, followed by a familiar voice. "Well, if it isn't my favorite soldier trying to fix the world again." Logan turned. Ruby Miller stood there, holding a thermos steaming in her mittened hand. Her cheeks were red from the cold, her silver hair escaping the knitted hat like soft feathers. "I figured you'd be here," she said. "Brought coffee and a cinnamon roll. You skipped breakfast, didn't you?" Dr. Hart smiled in greeting. "Morning, Ruby. You and your baked miracles are always welcome." Ruby chuckled and handed the thermos to Logan, who mumbled a quiet thank you. "That poor little thing," she said, glancing at the Doberman. "You know, my late husband once found a kitten in a gutter during a storm. He swore up and down he wouldn't keep it, but that cat slept on his chest every night for the next 10 years. Her tone softened. "Sometimes blessings come wrapped in fur and trouble." Logan managed a faint smile, though the tension in his jaw betrayed the war inside him. "I'm not sure I can handle more responsibility," he admitted quietly. Ruby tilted her head, eyes kind but firm. "Responsibility, maybe not. But love? You've got more room for that than you think." Dr. Hart finished securing the IV line and turned to him. "He'll make it," she said. "With care and food and someone who doesn't give up on him." Her gaze lingered for a beat. "You don't strike me as someone who gives up easily, Mr. Carter." He looked away, swallowing the words that wanted to rise. If only she knew how many times he had almost done just that. Scout whined, a soft, pleading sound, and placed both front paws on Logan's boot. The gesture was small, but impossible to ignore. Those amber eyes, steady and honest, seemed to say everything. "Don't leave him, Dad. He's one of us now." Dr. Hart removed her gloves and leaned on the counter. "So," she said gently, "shall I call the rescue center? Or are you thinking about fostering him yourself?" The question hung in the warm air like a dare wrapped in kindness. Logan stared at the Doberman, who had lifted his head just enough to meet his gaze. Beneath the fear, there was a spark. Not of trust yet, but of will. The same spark he had once seen in the mirror during the worst nights overseas. He took a long breath, the kind that steadies a soldier before stepping into uncertainty. "We'll take him," he said finally, voice low, but sure. Ruby clapped her mittened hands together softly. "I knew it," she said, smiling through misty eyes. Scout wagged his tail, letting out a soft bark of victory, and leaned forward to lick the Doberman's ear. The smaller puppy didn't pull away this time. Dr. Hart smiled as she began writing up a care plan. "All right then," she said. "Let's get you the supplies you'll need. And Logan, welcome to being a father of two." As they stepped outside minutes later, the snow had eased into a gentle fall. The clouds parted just enough for sunlight to touch the icy rooftops, and the world seemed to breathe again. Logan glanced at the little Doberman swaddled in his coat, then down at Scout, whose tail brushed against his leg. He couldn't say why, but for the first time in a long while, the road ahead didn't look empty. He muttered to himself, half smiling, "All right, you two, let's get home." Scout looked up, eyes bright, as if he'd known all along that this was exactly how it would end. The cabin at the edge of Silver Creek sat wrapped in a white hush. Snow rested thick along the pine branches outside, turning the world into one slow breath. Inside, the faint crackle of fire was the only sound that dared to move. The light from the hearth painted the small wooden walls in a soft amber glow, flickering over old family photos. A row of medals kept inside a dusty frame, and the pair of sleeping dogs curled on the braided rug. Logan Carter stood by the window, hands resting on the wooden sill. His reflection stared back at him through the fogged glass. The same tired eyes, the same faint scar along his temple that years refused to heal. The doctor's words from the day before still echoed in his head. He'll make it, with care. Care, Logan thought, was something he was still learning to give. He had spent most of his adult life following orders, surviving battlefields where compassion was a luxury. Now, he was learning that the quiet required a different kind of courage. Scout was the easy one, loyal, predictable, his every move tied to Logan's heartbeat. But Harper, the young Doberman, was something else entirely. The pup was barely holding on to trust. Any sudden sound, a door creak, a chair scrape, even the wind's whistle through the chimney, made him flinch, curl tighter into the blanket nest Logan had made by the stove. He had eaten only a few bites of food since they returned from the clinic. Each movement was cautious, every glance guarded. "Easy, kid," Logan murmured, lowering himself to one knee. He placed a shallow bowl of softened food on the floor. Scout padded forward, tail wagging in gentle rhythm. The German Shepherd nudged a few bites from his own bowl toward Harper's. The little Doberman blinked, uncertain, and then inched closer. His ribs still showed, but his eyes held more life today, small sparks of curiosity instead of pure fear. He sniffed the food, then looked to Scout, who waited quietly, tail sweeping the floor. Logan watched, holding his breath, as Harper finally took a bite. It was a small, trembling moment, but to Logan, it felt like victory. "That's it," he whispered. "You're safe now." Scout wagged once, leaning his muzzle against Harper's back, as if proud of the progress. Harper leaned into the touch. In that simple gesture, Logan saw more than instinct. He saw healing. He moved to the fireplace, tossed another log in, and let the flames rise. The light danced across the room, catching the corner where an old rocking chair sat. It had belonged to his mother, Elaine. She used to sit there when he was a boy, knitting by the fire while the snow fell outside. For a moment, the warmth of the room carried him back to those years. Before war, before scars, he could almost hear her humming. A knock broke the silence. Logan stiffened, out of habit more than alarm. He opened the door to find a small, bundled figure on the porch, his mother herself, smiling beneath the heavy snowflakes. "You didn't think I'd let my son freeze up here without checking, did you?" she said, voice carrying that mix of affection and authority only mothers manage to blend. Elaine Carter was 68, but moved with the grace of someone who'd spent her life tending to others. Her hair, once chestnut brown, was now silver white, braided and tucked under a knitted hat. Her face had softened with age, but still carried the firmness of a woman who had raised a soldier alone. Her hands were strong, her eyes a kind gray blue that saw through pretenses. "Mom," Logan said, smiling despite himself. "You should have called first. Roads are slick." "I did call. You didn't answer." She stepped inside, brushing off her coat. "So I took that as an invitation." Her eyes immediately went to the dogs. "Well now," she said softly, "you didn't tell me you doubled your family overnight." Logan rubbed the back of his neck. "Wasn't exactly planned." Elaine crouched beside the fire, her movements steady, practiced. Scout trotted over to greet her, tail thumping against the rug. "And who's this handsome boy?" she asked, scratching behind his ears. Scout responded by sitting perfectly still, proud and obedient. Harper, however, stayed back in the corner, head low. Elaine turned her gaze gently toward him. "And who's this little one?" "Harper," Logan said quietly. "He's new. Scout found him." She nodded slowly, her eyes softening. "He's got that look," she said, "like he's waiting to be told the world's safe again." Logan said nothing. He didn't need to. His mother had always read people, and dogs, better than he could read himself. Elaine stood and walked to the kitchen, setting her gloves on the counter. "I brought stew," she said, "and pie, because no son of mine is going to live on canned soup and frozen waffles." He chuckled quietly, the first real laugh in days. "You know me too well." "Of course," she said. "You're predictable. You're your father's son." The mention of his father drew a shadow across Logan's face, but Elaine kept her tone light. "He would have liked this house," she continued, ladling stew into 2 bowls. "Simple, quiet, full of things worth keeping." When they sat at the small table near the window, the dogs stayed close by. Harper still hovered near the corner, but Scout lay halfway between him and the humans, bridging the space. Logan caught his mother, watching them with a faint smile. "You see," she said, "even dogs know family takes time." They ate in companionable silence for a while. The warmth of the fire mixed with the rich scent of stew, and outside, the snow continued to fall in slow, lazy spirals. Harper had dozed off at last, nose tucked under Scout's chest. Logan found himself studying the pair, feeling something in his chest loosen, a knot that had been tightening for years. When Elaine stood to leave later that afternoon, the sun had dipped low, turning the windows gold. She bent to stroke Harper gently along his back. The puppy stirred, blinking, but didn't recoil. She smiled at the small victory. "You've done good, Logan," she said. "I can feel it. This house feels warmer than it used to." He saw her to the door, the cold wind brushing against them as she stepped out. "Drive safe," he said. "Always do." She looked up at him, eyes glinting. "Don't forget, sometimes the ones we save end up saving us." After she left, the silence returned, soft and deep. Logan turned back toward the fireplace. Harper had moved. The puppy, once glued to the corner, had left his blanket and curled right beside Scout, their heads resting together. Scout opened one eye, gave a small sigh, then let it close again. Logan crouched near them. the firelight flickering across his face. "You're getting brave, kid," he whispered. The room felt different now, not just warmer, but alive. He watched the two puppies breathe in sync, their chests rising and falling together. For the first time since returning from the war, the cabin didn't feel like a place of waiting. It felt like home. Morning came softly to Silver Creek, the kind that carried a brightness rare in winter. Sunlight glinting off layers of snow, air sharp enough to sting the lungs, but gentle enough to wake hope. Logan Carter stepped outside his cabin, pulling his coat tighter as a faint plume of breath drifted from his mouth. The snow that had buried the valley 2 days ago had finally settled into stillness. The world gleamed white and quiet, except for 2 sets of small paw prints that trailed from the porch to the yard. Scout bounded ahead, tail slicing the air, a ball gripped in his mouth, an old, faded tennis ball that had survived war zones of backyard mud. His coat shimmered under the pale sun, each muscle moving with grace and precision. Harper, smaller and still uncertain, followed behind at a clumsy half-run, paws too big for his legs, ears flopping with each step. His black and tan coat had thickened from steady meals, but his movements carried a mix of hesitation and determination. The scar on his left paw, faint but permanent, was a reminder of the frostbite he'd survived. Logan leaned against the porch railing, cane resting by his side. He watched as Scout stopped midway through the yard and dropped the ball, looking expectantly at Harper. For a long moment, the younger pup simply stared, unsure of the rules of this strange game. Then Scout gave the ball a gentle nudge toward him and backed away, tail wagging slowly, encouraging. Harper sniffed it once, then twice, as if confirming it wasn't a trick. Logan couldn't help but smile. "Come on, kid," he called, his voice low but warm. "It's yours." Harper tilted his head, glancing between Scout and Logan. And then finally, he did something he hadn't done before. He reached out a paw and tapped the ball. It rolled a few inches, barely enough to count, but it was enough to make Scout bark once in delight, spring forward, and push it back. Harper's eyes widened, and his tail gave a small, uncertain wag. They repeated the exchange, back and forth, until the timid movement turned into a chase. Harper's steps grew bolder. The once frozen puppy now darted across the snow with reckless puppy energy, his ears flapping like mismatched flags. Logan laughed quietly to himself. "There you go," he murmured. "That's how it's supposed to be." For the first time in months, the laughter didn't sound foreign in his throat. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. "You're up early," came his mother's voice. Elaine Carter stepped out wrapped in a thick wool shawl, her silver braid tucked neatly under a knitted cap. The light caught her face in soft gold, revealing faint wrinkles that deepened when she smiled. "And you didn't even make coffee yet. The world must be ending." Logan grinned. "It's too nice a morning to waste inside." She glanced toward the dogs. "Well, I'll be damned. The little one's playing." He nodded, following her gaze. "Scout's been working on him. Patient as a saint, that one." Elaine chuckled, stepping down the porch steps carefully. "He gets that from you, whether you admit it or not." They walked toward the old wooden fence that lined the property. Last night's windstorm had snapped one of the corner posts clean in half. Logan had already fetched the toolbox, its metal catching the morning light. He set to work alongside his mother, who despite her age moved with surprising agility. Years of gardening and single-handed maintenance after her husband's death had kept her strong. While Logan hammered the loosened nails back into place, she steadied the board. "You always did prefer fixing things yourself," she said, her tone both teasing and knowing. "Even when it's people." He paused mid-swing. "People are harder to fix." "That's why you're better with dogs," she replied simply. He smiled faintly. "Maybe." They worked in silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of hammering blending with the crunch of snow beneath Scout's and Harper's paws. The dogs ran circles around them, a blur of tan and black fur. Occasionally, Harper stopped to sniff the tools or look up at Logan with wide, questioning eyes before darting off again. A car passed down the distant road, an old red pickup with a snowplow attached. The driver, Bill Henderson, raised a gloved hand in greeting. Bill was a man in his late 50s, a retired forest ranger with a beard that looked like it could hide an entire bird's nest. His truck rattled like it was held together by faith alone. Bill had known the Carters since Logan was a boy and treated Elaine like a sister. "Fence again?" he called out as he slowed the truck. "Storm last night," Logan replied, brushing snow from his gloves. Bill chuckled, the sound rough but friendly. "You should just let me put a new one up for you next spring. This old thing's more memories than wood." "Memories hold better than nails sometimes," Elaine said, smiling. Bill tipped his hat. "Can't argue with that." He glanced toward the two dogs. "Well, look at that. Didn't think I'd ever see Carter with two of anything that breathes." Logan laughed. "Don't spread it around." Bill grinned. "Too late," he said, waving as he drove off, leaving a trail of stirred snow. By noon, the fence stood steady again. Elaine wiped her hands on her coat and nodded approvingly. "Good as new," she said. "At least until the next storm." Logan leaned on the post, watching Harper chase Scout in wild loops across the yard. The younger dog had discovered joy, pure and unfiltered. His bark, though still small, echoed across the open field like a victory cry. At one point, Harper stumbled, rolled, and ended up flat on his back, legs in the air. Instead of freezing in panic, as he once would have, he barked again, this time with laughter in it. Scout ran back to him, nosing his side as if saying, "Get up, soldier." Harper jumped up and returned the nudge, their tails crossing like brushstrokes of life on the snow. Elaine followed her son's gaze. "He's come a long way," she said quietly. Logan nodded, his eyes soft. "Yeah, so have we." She looked at him for a long moment. "You know," she said gently, "your father used to say, healing never happens all at once. It sneaks up on you. Usually when you're not looking." He turned to her with a small smile. I think he was right. The afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the snow. Elaine went back inside to prepare dinner, leaving Logan alone with the dogs. The cold bit through his gloves, but he didn't care. He picked up the tennis ball and tossed it lightly across the yard. Scout sprinted after it, but Harper was right behind him now, not lagging, not afraid. When Scout stopped to retrieve it, Harper boldly snatched it first and came bounding back toward Logan, tail wagging furiously. Logan crouched, laughing. "Oh, you thief," he said, as Harper dropped the ball and pressed his nose into Logan's gloved hand. The warmth of that small gesture hit deeper than expected, a wordless thank you. Logan scratched behind the puppy's ears, feeling the steady beat of a heart that had learned to trust again. From the porch, Scout sat watching, calm and proud, as though he'd been waiting for this very moment, his student's first real step toward life. The firelight from inside spilled faintly through the window, glowing gold across the snow. Logan stayed there a while longer, surrounded by quiet, by warmth, and by two loyal souls who had somehow rebuilt his broken home. By afternoon, the first signs of the storm arrived. A sky bruised with gray, the kind that pressed low enough to make the mountains disappear. Logan Carter stood on the porch, one hand resting on the railing, the other holding his coffee mug that had long since gone cold. The air was heavy, still, and waiting. The smell of snow was sharp and unmistakable. He had seen storms before, both the kind nature sent and the kind life delivered. And this one promised to be the sort that tested what a person was made of. Scout was already restless, pacing near the door, sensing what was coming. His fur bristled against the wind, as if bracing for a fight. Harper, smaller and more cautious, stood behind the threshold. One paw lifted uncertainly, his black and tan fur ruffled by the cold draft slipping through the doorframe. The young Doberman had grown stronger these past weeks, but sudden sounds still made him flinch. The slam of a window, the crack of ice. Today, even the shifting air seemed to make his ears twitch nervously. "Storm's close," Logan murmured, his breath visible in the chill. He shut the door firmly and moved through the cabin, checking every window latch. The lights flickered once, then again, before dying completely. The silence that followed was deep and unnerving. Only the wind outside remained, howling like something alive. He set down the mug, grabbed the flashlight from the counter, and lit a few candles around the living room. The fire still burned faintly in the hearth, its orange glow flickering across the wooden walls. Shadows danced on the old pictures that hung above the mantel. His father's photo in uniform, a younger version of himself grinning beside a squad, all now framed by the steady hum of wind outside. A sharp crack split the air, the roof groaning under the first heavy blast. Harper yelped, darting toward the corner by instinct. Scout barked once, deep and commanding, before trotting to Harper's side and touching noses with him. The shepherd's steady posture seemed to pull the smaller dog back to earth. Harper let out a low, uncertain whine. Then as the next gust hit, he surprised them both by barking. High-pitched, shaky, but brave. Logan crouched beside them, rubbing both dogs' heads. "That's it, Harper," he said softly. "You tell the storm who's boss." The three of them stayed near the fire as the wind howled and snow pelted the windows. The cabin creaked under pressure. Logan could feel the old wooden beams straining like an exhausted soldier holding the line. He fetched blankets from the closet, spread them on the floor near the hearth, and lay down beside the dogs. Scout took his usual place along Logan's left side, warm and steady as always. Harper hesitated before curling up on the right, trembling slightly. Within minutes, Scout adjusted his body, pressing closer to Harper until the two pups formed a wall of warmth around him. Their breathing, soft and even, filled the room with a rhythm that reminded Logan of safety he hadn't felt since long before war. As the night deepened, snow buried the world outside in silence. Every so often, the roof moaned, or a branch cracked in the forest beyond. Harper would raise his head, ears alert, then settle again after Scout's reassuring nudge. Logan kept one hand on both of them, feeling the pulse of life beneath his fingers. For a man who had once watched friends fade away in distant deserts, that small heartbeat beneath the storm was enough. A knock came suddenly at the door, faint but distinct over the wind. Scout's head lifted immediately, body tense, ready to guard. Logan rose slowly, grabbed the flashlight, and approached the door with cautious familiarity, the kind learned from years in uniform. When he opened it, a rush of cold air swept in along with a flurry of snow, and behind it, a familiar voice. "Don't shoot, soldier," said Ruby Miller, bundled in a red wool coat and thick scarf, her bicycle nowhere in sight. Snow clung to her silver hair like frost on wire. "I brought reinforcements." "Ruby?" Logan blinked. "You walked here." "Baked my best batch this morning, and I wasn't about to let a little snow stop me." She lifted a basket wrapped in cloth. Steam and the sweet smell of cinnamon and butter drifted out. "Besides," she said, brushing snow from her gloves, "storms are better with company." Logan stepped aside, shaking his head but smiling. "You're a stubborn woman." "Takes one to know one," she shot back. She set the basket on the table and looked around the dimly lit room. "Well, you've got light, heat, and 2 soldiers on 4 legs. I'd say you're better prepared than most." Her gaze softened as she looked at the dogs, both now awake and watching her curiously. "My, they're beautiful," she said, "especially the little one. You wouldn't know he'd been through hell not long ago." Harper tilted his head at her voice, curiosity overtaking fear. Ruby crouched slowly, her knees cracking faintly. "Hey there, sweetheart," she said, offering the back of her gloved hand. "Aren't you brave, staying warm in a storm like this?" Logan poured her a cup of tea from the kettle he'd heated earlier. "You shouldn't have come all this way." "Oh, hush," she said, waving a hand. "I needed to stretch my legs. And bring these." She uncovered a small loaf of sweetbread and 2 pastries. "Old recipe from my mother. Never fails to calm nerves." As they sat near the fire, Ruby told stories, half memory, half lesson. "You know," she said, her eyes reflecting the flames, "I once asked my pastor why bad things find good souls. You know what he said? That maybe they're not punishments at all. Maybe they're callings, ways God reminds us we're still needed." Logan listened quietly, the words cutting deeper than she knew. "You really believe that?" "I do," Ruby said. "I think he puts every living thing in our path for a reason, even a shivering puppy under a bench. Some things were meant to rescue. Others, well, they're meant to rescue us." For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire popped softly, throwing sparks like tiny stars. Harper rested his head on Scout's paw, eyelids drooping. Outside, the wind's fury began to ease. By dawn, the storm had spent itself. The world outside was blinding white, as if freshly created. Ruby dozed on the armchair, wrapped in a blanket, the basket of pastries half empty beside her. Scout stretched and yawned, then padded toward the door, pawing at it once, his signal that the day had begun. Logan opened it slowly, squinting at the brightness. Snowdrifts rose high, swallowing the steps. Harper approached cautiously, nose twitching at the sharp cold. For a heartbeat, he hesitated, the fear still there, small but real. Then with a sudden burst of courage, he bounded forward into the snow, landing clumsily but joyfully. He looked back once at Logan and Scout, ears perked, chest lifting with the wind. Logan smiled, his breath visible in the crisp air. "Go on, Harper," he said softly. "You've earned it." The little Doberman lifted his head toward the pale sky, eyes half closed, letting the cold wind wash over him. For the first time, he didn't flinch. The snow had begun to melt, leaving behind the wet, heavy scent of thawing pine and earth. The air outside the cabin no longer burned the lungs, but carried the soft chill of early March. Inside, Logan Carter sat at his kitchen table, his elbows braced on a stack of bills, a mug of untouched coffee cooling beside them. A single envelope lay apart from the rest. Crisp, official, its typewritten heading already enough to make his stomach knot. He tore it open with a sigh. The letter came from Silver Creek Estates, the property management company that owned his rented cabin. The message was polite, but sharp in its precision. Tenants with more than one dog must pay an additional monthly fee to remain in compliance with the lease agreement. The total amount, written neatly at the bottom, was small enough to seem trivial on paper, but large enough to tip the scales of his already fragile budget. He read it twice, then leaned back, running a hand over his face. The faint scrape of stubble against his palm sounded louder in the quiet. Scout lay at his feet, chin on his paws, amber eyes fixed on him with unspoken worry. Harper, now healthier and nearly grown into his long legs, sat by the wood stove, head tilted as if he could sense something in the air, a shift he didn't yet understand. Logan reached down and scratched Scout behind the ears. "They want more money," he said flatly, his voice low and tired. Scout gave a small huff, as if unimpressed with human bureaucracy. "Yeah," Logan muttered, forcing a half-smile. "That's what I thought too." He grabbed a notepad and began writing figures. Rent, heat, gas, groceries, medication for his leg. The column of numbers seemed to grow longer each month. He'd planned carefully when he moved here, choosing simplicity over comfort, quiet over noise. But simplicity, it seemed, came with hidden costs. He'd already taken a part-time maintenance job in town, fixing fences and clearing snow for neighbors. Even that wouldn't stretch enough. The creak of floorboards pulled him from his thoughts. His mother, Elaine Carter, stepped into the kitchen. Her gray hair gathered into a loose bun. She wore a thick wool sweater, the same one she'd had since Logan was a teenager, mended at the elbows. The early morning light softened the lines on her face, but couldn't hide the concern in her eyes. "You're up early," she said, pouring herself coffee. "That's never a good sign." He held up the letter. "It's from the management office. They're charging an extra fee for having 2 dogs. Elaine took the paper, read it once, and frowned. "They know you're a veteran, don't they? They should be ashamed of themselves." "Doesn't change the math," Logan said. "Rules are rules." She sat across from him, fingers wrapped around her mug. "So what are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," he admitted. "I can't afford it long term. Not with the repairs the truck needs." He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "I might call the rescue center, see if they can find Harper a good home." Elaine's eyes widened slightly, but her voice stayed calm. "A good home?" "He'd be taken care of," Logan said quickly, though the words felt wrong even as he said them. "There are families waiting for dogs like him." She looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "That little dog sleeps with his head on Scout's paws every night. You really think either of them will understand why one's gone in the morning?" He dropped his gaze to the floor. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. Later that day, after Elaine went to town for groceries, Logan stayed behind, unable to shake the guilt that had settled in his chest. He tried distracting himself with chores, splitting logs, tightening the loose hinge on the back door, checking the generator. But each sound of the dogs playing in the yard brought the decision back like a wound reopening. Through the window, he watched Scout and Harper chase each other in the slushy yard. Scout, confident and muscular, moved with effortless precision, while Harper's long limbs still made him look slightly uncoordinated. They were a strange pair, one calm and steady, the other curious and impulsive. Yet somehow, they mirrored each other perfectly. Watching them together, Logan saw a quiet rhythm that didn't exist before he found Harper. The yard, the cabin, even his own life felt fuller now. But feelings didn't pay bills. The crunch of tires on gravel signaled Elaine's return. She stepped out of her old blue pickup, her cheeks flushed from the cold, her hands gripping 2 grocery bags and something else, a wooden box, old and ornate, with brass latches. She set it down on the table as she came in. "What's that?" Logan asked, wiping his hands on a rag. She hesitated before answering. "It's from the attic. Belonged to your grandmother." She opened it to reveal a collection of antique trinkets, porcelain figurines, silver spoons, an old locket with faded initials. "There's a shop in town that buys vintage pieces. I thought maybe." "Mom." He cut her off gently but firmly. "You're not selling family things because of this?" Her expression softened, but she didn't back down. "They're just things, Logan." "They're yours," he said, his tone steady but low. "You worked too hard to hold on to them." She sighed, sitting down across from him. "You always do this. You take the weight of the world and carry it alone. You think that's strength, but it's just pride in disguise." He didn't answer. Instead, he looked at the 2 dogs lying together near the hearth, Scout half asleep, Harper's head resting across his companion's back. The thought of separating them twisted something deep inside him, but the letter on the table wouldn't go away. That evening, after Elaine left for her own house down the road, Logan picked up the phone and dialed the number for Silver Creek Rescue, the same place he'd called weeks ago when he first found Harper. The line rang twice before a woman's voice answered. "Silver Creek Rescue, this is Sarah." Sarah's voice was calm and professional, with a slight rasp that hinted at long days and too many phone calls. "How can I help you tonight?" "I've got a young Doberman I've been fostering," Logan said slowly. "I wanted to ask about the process of surrendering." There was a pause on the line, not of judgment, but of understanding. "Is it for financial reasons?" she asked gently. "Yes," he said. "Lease issues." "We can take him in, but we'd need a few days to arrange space," she replied. "Can I put you down for an appointment next Thursday?" "Yeah," Logan said after a moment. "Thursday's fine." When he hung up, the cabin felt colder. Scout lifted his head, ears pricking, sensing something wrong. Harper padded over to him, eyes wide, tail still. Logan crouched beside them, trying to steady his voice. "It's just for a while," he murmured. "You'll be safe, both of you." But the dogs weren't listening. Scout stood up and walked to the front door, then lay across the threshold, blocking it with his body. Harper followed, sitting close beside him, his tail tucked low, pressing his head against Scout's shoulder. Their silent protest said more than words could. Logan leaned against the wall, his throat tightening. For the first time since receiving the letter, he let himself feel the weight of what he was about to lose. The room glowed with the soft flicker of firelight. 2 shadows curled together at the door. One steady, one still learning to be brave, standing guard against a world that had never been fair. The drive to Silver Creek Rescue felt longer than it was. The morning was pale and gray, snow melting into slush along the roadside. Logan Carter's hands gripped the steering wheel hard enough to turn his knuckles white. In the rearview mirror, he could see Scout sitting rigid on the back seat, muscles taut, amber eyes locked on the small crate beside him. Inside, Harper pressed himself against the side of the kennel, trembling but silent. Each bump of the road made his ears twitch, his eyes flickering toward Scout for reassurance. The air inside the truck felt heavy, not with noise, but with the quiet weight of knowing. When they reached the rescue center, the building rose from the snow like a memory of better intentions. A white-painted structure with blue trim and a faded sign that read, Silver Creek Animal Haven. The parking lot was half frozen, dotted with old cars. Logan parked near the entrance and turned off the engine. The silence that followed felt final. He turned to face the dogs. Scout was already staring back at him, head tilted, chest rising fast. Harper's paws scratched faintly against the crate door. Logan reached back, resting his hand on the wire. "It's okay, boy," he said softly. "They'll take good care of you." The words caught halfway out of his throat. Inside, the warmth hit him like a wave. The smell of antiseptic mixed with the faint musk of fur. A young volunteer behind the counter smiled politely, but looked tired, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "You must be Mr. Carter," she said, checking a clipboard. "We were expecting you. You spoke with Sarah, right?" He nodded. "Yeah. Sarah's out on a call right now, but Mrs. Margaret can help you with the intake." She gestured toward a hallway. "Down there, last office on the left." He followed her directions, Scout and Harper walking beside him. Scout's leash was taut, his steps slow and deliberate, like he was guarding something sacred. Harper stayed close, ears low, glancing around nervously at the sound of barking dogs echoing from nearby kennels. In the office, Margaret Hale, the center's manager, sat behind a cluttered wooden desk. She was a woman of about 65, tall but slightly stooped, her gray hair pinned in a loose bun that had surrendered to a few wild strands. Her blue sweater bore traces of white fur, and her glasses hung from a chain around her neck. Her eyes, though tired, carried a deep kindness that made even silence feel softer. "You must be Logan," she said, rising with a faint creak in her knees. "I heard about your situation." He shook her hand. Her grip was warm and firm. "I know this isn't easy," she continued gently. "Why don't we sit for a bit? You can tell me about Harper." Logan lowered himself into the chair opposite her. "He's about 5 months now," he said quietly. "Found him during a snowstorm. He was half-starved. My shepherd, Scout, found him first." He smiled faintly at the memory, though it hurt to recall it. "They've been inseparable since." Margaret nodded. "We see that sometimes. Rescue bonds. But yours sounds stronger." He swallowed hard. "They sleep together every night. Eat together. Harper won't even start eating until Scout does." Her gaze softened. "I can tell this isn't what you want to do." "It's not," he admitted. "But the landlord raised the fees. I can't cover it." She sighed, taking off her glasses. "The world's full of unfair contracts, Mr. Carter. I've signed a few myself." Her voice dropped slightly. "When I was young, maybe 20, I worked as a volunteer at a shelter in Oregon. My first week, a family brought in 2 kittens, brother and sister. Couldn't keep them both. I was told to separate them. I remember their cries the night they were taken to different foster homes." She paused, eyes distant. "I didn't think much of it then, but I've heard that sound in my sleep for 40 years." Logan said nothing, just listened as she looked down at her folded hands. We think animals forget, but I don't believe that anymore. They remember love, and they remember loss. Her words hit something deep inside him, the same place where years of war and silence had buried his own regrets. He cleared his throat. Can I at least say goodbye properly? Of course, she said softly. She motioned to the assistant at the door. Take Harper to room 3 for check-in. The young volunteer clipped a leash to Harper's collar. The Doberman froze, resisting slightly. His eyes darted toward Scout, who immediately pulled forward, muscles rigid. Logan knelt beside them both. Easy, Scout, he murmured, holding the shepherd's collar. He'll be okay? But even as he said it, Scout's body trembled. As the volunteer led Harper down the hall, the little dog kept looking back over his shoulder, each step slower than the last. Scout whined, a low, pained sound that made heads turn. When the door to the exam room closed, he lunged forward, pressing his paws against it, nose scraping the edge. A deep, mournful howl escaped him, raw and haunting. It was the kind of sound that carried through walls and hearts alike. Harper barked from inside, high-pitched and panicked. The sounds overlapped. One begging, one answering, until even the staff went still. Margaret stood by the window, her hand over her mouth. My God, she whispered. They're calling for each other. Logan's chest tightened. They've never been apart. The assistant reappeared, looking uneasy. Mrs. Hale, they're both really stressed. Should I? Margaret nodded. Open the door. The young woman hesitated, but did as told. Harper burst through the gap before the latch fully released, scrambling across the tile toward Scout. He pressed his small body against the larger dog's chest, trembling. Scout lowered his head and wrapped a paw protectively over him. The room filled with the quiet hum of 2 heartbeats sinking back into rhythm. Margaret blinked hard and turned away for a moment. I've been doing this job 30 years, she said softly, her voice thick. I've seen loyalty, fear, hope, but I don't think I've ever seen love quite like that. Logan swallowed, his throat dry. I'm sorry, he said. I just wanted to make sure he'd be safe. Margaret walked closer, her steps slow but deliberate. Sometimes safety isn't what they need most, she said. Sometimes what they need is each other. He crouched beside them, resting a hand on both dogs. Scout leaned into his touch. Harper lifted his face, those dark, trusting eyes meeting Logan's as if to say, please don't do this. That look undid the last of his resolve. He looked up at Margaret. Can you bring him back out here for a minute? Her brows lifted, surprised. I need to say goodbye, he said quietly. Just for a minute? She nodded and stepped aside, watching silently. Logan rose slowly, his leg aching from the cold floor. The 2 dogs followed him to the doorway, still pressed together. Scout nudged Harper once, as if asking permission. Harper responded by tucking his small head under Scout's chin. Logan stared at them for a long moment, then exhaled a shaky breath. Forget it, he whispered. I can't do it. Margaret's eyes softened with quiet understanding. You don't have to. Logan looked at her, his voice rough but certain. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that you don't separate what God's already bound together. He turned back toward the dogs. Scout's tail gave a small, relieved wag, while Harper pressed even closer, letting out a soft, contented sigh. Logan felt the weight lift from his chest. Not gone, but lighter. Replaced by something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The morning sun returned to Silver Creek, as if it too had been waiting for good news. The sky was a pale blue. Thin clouds stretched like silk threads across it, and for the first time in weeks, the air no longer bit the skin. Logan Carter stood in front of his cabin's window, coffee in hand, watching Scout and Harper playing in the yard. Scout dashed ahead, his strong body cutting through the snow like a bronze streak, while Harper followed, his lean Doberman frame clumsy but full of energy. Their paw prints crossed and recrossed, a web of life where there used to be only emptiness. A knock at the door drew him from the window. When he opened it, the cold brushed his face gently, and there stood Margaret Hale, the rescue center's manager, bundled in a heavy coat and wearing her signature knitted blue scarf. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, and her eyes, those calm, steady eyes, sparkled in the sunlight. "Morning, Mr. Carter," she greeted with a smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Logan said, stepping aside. "Come in. You look like you walked halfway here." She chuckled, brushing snow from her coat as she entered. "The road's clear enough now. I've got something for you." She reached into her leather satchel and handed him a small stack of papers. The top page bore the letterhead of the Veteran Companion Grant Foundation. "I made a few calls after you left," she said. "One of our partner programs provides assistance for veterans who adopt or care for service or rescue animals. I told them about your situation, the fees, the bond between your dogs, your service record. They approved your application." Logan blinked. "I didn't apply for anything." She smiled. "I did. Sometimes people need someone else to believe for them." He took the papers, scanning the bold words. Approved. Full sponsorship of housing pet fees under the Veteran Support Initiative. His throat tightened. It means Harper stays," she said simply. "Officially, both of them are yours. No rescues, no shelters, no deadlines, just family." For a long moment, Logan said nothing. His eyes dropped to the floor, where Scout had padded over, tail wagging lazily, Harper following close behind. The two dogs sat side by side, their heads tilted up at him like children, waiting for permission to celebrate. Logan crouched down, running a hand along each of their necks. "You hear that, boys?" he murmured. "You're home. For good." Scout barked once, deep and confident. Harper gave a high, excited yip before pressing himself against Scout's shoulder, tail wagging in wild little arcs. Margaret laughed softly, tears shining faintly behind her glasses. "There's just one formality left," she said, taking out another document and placing it on the table. "The adoption paperwork. Both dogs under your name." Logan reached for a pen. His fingers trembled slightly, not from cold, but from something deeper, something like relief mixed with disbelief. He glanced at the blank lines awaiting ink. "Scout Carter," he said softly, writing the name carefully, "and Harper Carter." The pen scratched gently across the paper, and with each stroke, the cabin seemed to exhale. Two names, one family. As he signed the last page, both dogs crawled under the table and lay close together, their bodies pressed side by side. Scout rested his chin over Harper's neck, eyes half closed, as if guarding the moment itself. Margaret stood quietly nearby, her expression warm and knowing. "That's a good sight," she said. "You'd be surprised how many people give up before reaching it." Logan looked up. "I've given up on a lot of things in my life," he admitted, "but not this." She smiled gently. "Good, because this..." She gestured toward the dogs, the papers, the firelight flickering over the wood floor. This is what redemption looks like. After Margaret left, the house filled with a silence that wasn't empty, but whole. Elaine arrived that afternoon, carrying a casserole dish and a mischievous smile. "I heard you got some good news," she said, setting the dish on the counter. "Margaret called me. You didn't think you could hide that from your own mother, did you?" Logan laughed, shaking his head. "I was going to tell you tonight." "Well, now you can tell me over dinner," she said, brushing her hands together. "And don't you dare say no. I brought pie." As the day faded, the three of them, Logan, Elaine, and the two dogs, sat around the small kitchen table. The cabin glowed with warmth and the scent of apple pie. Outside, the world was turning gold and blue, the snow catching the last light of dusk. Through the window, Scout and Harper played, racing in wide circles that kicked up soft clouds of powder. They darted through the snow like sparks of fire meeting midair, unbreakable, untamed. Elaine watched them with a soft smile. "You know," she said, "your father would have liked those two. He always said God sends us company when we stop asking for it." Logan nodded, eyes lingering on the window. "Yeah," he said quietly, "maybe that's how miracles really work." When night came, the cabin settled into peace. The fire crackled gently, casting long shadows across the walls. Scout and Harper curled up in front of it, their fur glowing gold under the light. Logan sat nearby, a blanket draped over his knees, a mug of tea in his hands. He watched the dogs breathing in rhythm, two hearts that had once beat in fear, now steady and calm. He leaned forward, resting an elbow on his knee, and spoke softly to the room, or maybe to himself. "Scout saved him," he murmured, voice barely above a whisper. Then his eyes softened, and a small smile tugged at his mouth. "And Harper saved us." Outside, snow began to fall again, light and slow, each flake drifting down like a quiet blessing. Elaine dozed in the armchair. The fire hummed low, and the two dogs slept pressed together, the German shepherd's head resting over the Doberman's shoulder. In that stillness, the house no longer felt like a cabin at the edge of nowhere. It felt like home, the kind built not from walls or wood, but from the fragile, steadfast bond between hearts that refused to let go. And somewhere deep in the woods, under the silent snowfall, Silver Creek breathed with them, alive, forgiving, and whole again. In the quiet warmth of that cabin, as snow kept falling beyond the window, one truth remained. Miracles don't always come with thunder or light. Sometimes they arrive on four paws, wrapped in fur and loyalty, reminding us that love is never lost. It simply finds new forms. God often works through the smallest moments, a bark, a touch, a heartbeat, to show us that redemption is real, and no soul is ever too broken to be healed. So, if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need to believe again. Leave a comment, subscribe for more stories of hope, and may God bless you and every life that still dares to love.